Good morning. Welcome to this special chamber event. My name is Jeff Lang. I have the honor of serving as chairman of the board of the Muncie-Delaware County Chamber of Commerce this year. One of the goals of the chamber is to help connect our members with our elected officials. Events like Breakfast with the Governor and legislative updates are but a few ways that we try to help keep our members in touch with their leaders. We couldn't do this without support of our many, many sponsors, and I'd like to specifically thank the ones that help support our breakfast today. They are Meridian Health Services, Littler Diecast, AT&T, The Woodlands, IU Health Ball Memorial Hospital, Sherry Laboratories, and Boyce Systems. Can we acknowledge our sponsors for today, please? Now, please allow me to introduce Brent Webster. Brent is currently serving as chairman of the board of directors for Meridian Health Services. Brent?
Well, good morning to everyone. Yes, Brent Webster with First Merchants Insurance Group, but today I've put on my Meridian board hat, and we are very proud to be the sponsor for this event. As you know, Meridian is a progressive healthcare organization that specializes really in whole person health, integrating the physical, the mental, and the social well-being of the individual. We are especially pleased to have Senator Dan Coates as our speaker today, and I can personally attest to the Senator's assistance and support as Meridian was seeking the designation as a federally qualified healthcare center. With the help of Senator Coates' office, Meridian was able to successfully obtain this designation, which allows us to now provide primary health care in our local communities. Well, let me share a little bit more about Senator Coates. Dan Coates is currently the junior senator, the United States Senator from Indiana, and he served in the United States Senate from 1989 to 1999, retired and then returned in 2011. He was born in Jackson, Michigan. He graduated from Wheaton College in Illinois and then the Indiana University School of Law. He served in the U.S. Army from 1966 to 1968, and before serving in the U.S. Senate, Senator Coates was a member of the United States House of Representatives, representing Indiana's 4th Congressional District from 1981 to 1989. He was appointed to fill the seat that was vacated by Dan Quayle following Quayle's election as Vice President of the United States in 1988. Senator Coates won the 1990 special election to serve the remainder of Quayle's unexpired term, and then as well as the 1992 election for a full 6-year term. He did not seek re-election in 1998 and then was succeeded by Evan Bayh. After retiring from the Senate, Senator Coates served as the U.S. Ambassador to Germany from 2001 to 2005. After his time as ambassador, he worked at the law firm of King and Spalding and continued to be active in public service as well. Senator Coates has served as president of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of America and on the boards of many civic and volunteer organizations, which includes the Center for Jewish and Christian Values, which he co-chaired with Senator Joe Lieberman. Senator Coates and his wife Marcia, and again I apologize once again for splitting the two of you up in the seating arrangement, but as Marcia slept together last night. Yeah, so, and as I said earlier, with no political comment, I am kind of a bridge builder, so I was, happy to facilitate, but she said she spends enough time with you anyway, so this was a good deal. So, but anyway, Senator Coates and his wife Marcia formed the Foundation for American Renewal to continue their engagement in faith-based initiatives. Senator Coates has received national recognition as the author and champion of the Project for American Renewal, which is a comprehensive initiative centered to help resolve many of our nation's social problems. And in the 112th Congress, Senator Coates serves on 4 Senate committees, and those committees are Appropriations, Select Intelligence, Energy and Natural Resources, and the Joint Economic Committee. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would please welcome to Muncie, Senator Dan Coates.
Brett, thank you very much. You read the whole biography, and I probably wasn't necessary, but thank you. Mayor, nice to be with you this morning, and many of you, Hank, Milius, and Meridian, found a match here right away with Marcia. Marcia's has some degrees in counseling and family therapy, and so the two of them were talking about it. The last thing Marcia said before we walked in is there'd be a lot of Meridian people there, so try to act normal. So I'm a little bit concerned that there are people out there diagnosing me as I speak, and then they're going to talk about it afterward. I see Luke Messer, a friend and someone that's going to days away from joining me as a colleague in Washington, and I can't think of a better person to represent you following Mike Pence's great representation than Luke Messer. I'm really thrilled that Luke, you're coming to join us, and really look forward to working together with you. You've got a terrific new representative on the way, should the votes come in as we expect on Tuesday night. Brenda Brumfield deserves thanks, because I don't know if all this would have worked out without Brenda's engagement, and I'm looking around to find you, Brenda, but in any event here, thank you so much for everything that you have done to pull all this together. Well, the remark about coming back to office makes me, and Marcia being here, Hank and I were talking a little bit about this. I have said often, the toughest job in Washington is not being a member of Congress, it's being the spouse of a member of Congress, because of the demands on your time. And I still remember that day in Fort Wayne, Indiana, when I fortunately didn't put my hand on a Bible, held up my right hand, and I pledged to you I'm only going to do this for 2 years just to help Dan Quayle get started. And here we are many years later, in a career completely different than either of us had anticipated, and a life totally different than either of us anticipated. And I tell you, without a wife who can give you straight advice and support you through all this, this job would be very, very tough. Luke understands that. His good wife understands that, but Marcia has been an advisor and supporter, and when the call came to, would you be willing to go back and do it again, she was right there all the way. So she's made a great sacrifice to do that, including getting up at dark 100 this morning. I said, it's a beautiful sunny day outside. She said, it's midnight. In any event, we're glad to be here because we've had a good association with Muncie. As you know, Van Smith was my first campaign chairman. We've been friends with the Smith family for so long. We appreciate all that this wonderful university you have, and we have met with their president and many of you relative to that. And there's things, and I know Muncie's been through a tough time, but there are things coming back. We were just at Progress Energy, not Progress Energy, the diesel manufacturer, and some others, companies coming back into Muncie, and it's been the result of a lot of hard work by the Chamber. But what I'd like to speak briefly to you about this morning is the challenge that faces Luke and I, and Look at me, Marcia would say, right? See, that's one of the things that's going to have a good advice. With challenges facing Luke and me and others, including our next president, whether it's the re-election of our current president or the election of a new president and a new Congress. The challenges that we're going to have to deal with, and they're not small challenges. There are two major challenges that I think transcend all the others. And while energy and education and healthcare and a whole number of things are important and will have to be addressed, specifically healthcare, the challenges facing us are both one domestic and one international. The international is the continued threat of the proliferation of nuclear materials potentially in the hands of terrorists, which I call the terrorist bomb. And we see Iran crusading toward possession of nuclear capability and what the instability that would come in the Middle East as a result of that, particularly the tensions with Israel. We see the Arab uprising and the Muslim uprising all across northern Africa and the Middle East. We see terrorist groups forming as far from Indonesia as to Western Africa. And this is a conflict. I mean, this is a war that is not over. We've made strides against it, but it continues to be a threat to our economy, either whether it's a cyber threat or whether it's someone trying to bring a weapon of mass destruction or some other efforts to take down our economy, take down our people. America is in the gun sights of a number of terrorist groups around the world, and we have to be aware of that. There's a domestic challenge at home that all of us are familiar with, and that is the economic challenge. I believe we've pretty much come to the point where if we don't begin to address this now, it might be too late. As we've accumulated more than $1.3 trillion a year for 4 straight years, moving our debt from $10 trillion to $16 trillion, took 230 some years to get to 10. It took 4 years to get to 16. And it's going to be well over 20 if we continue at the current rate. And when you add that unbalanced amount of credit, swiping that federal credit card, at that rate, the deficits every year lead to debt. The debt moves to an unsustainable point. When it gets to an unsustainable point, the investors lose confidence in our ability to repay. Our credit ratings drop. We pay higher interest rates. The markets demand higher rates. All you have to do is look what's happening in Spain, and look what's happening across southern Europe. Look what Europe is trying to deal with. When that happens, you either have to tax more, or you have to go into more debt and borrow at higher rates. And when that happens, it becomes a death cycle. And I think we're very close to a death cycle unless we get a hold of this. That is a lot of what this election is about, what this debate is, who can best lead us to the necessary engagement of this challenge and successfully move us on a path to growth and prosperity. I've outlined that we need to do 4 things, and this has been talked about over the last couple of years. I've been very frustrated in my first 2 years back in the Senate for our inability to do this in 2011, subsequent to the 2010 elections, when I think the American people were demanding that we do that. And there were many efforts made, but all failed in 2011. And then we reached 2012, and everyone said, well, we can't do anything till after the election. 2014, we'll have another election. In 2015, at the rate we're going, I believe we will hit that big bang moment when we're going to start looking like Europe. That leaves 1 year, 2013, an off-election year, hopefully with a leader in the White House who understands this and has the ability to bring together the necessary coalition and pieces to put a package together that will put us on the path to prosperity and growth. And if that happens, we will then have sent a signal to the rest of the world that America's back in business. and that the U.S. dollar is going to be sound once again. The world is watching what we're doing, and as the Fed chairman told me at a private breakfast, when I asked the question, why what's happening in Europe isn't happening here yet, he said, because we're the best looking horse in the glue factory. Eventually, it's going to get to us. But right now, we're being compared with other nations that aren't doing that have hit the, well, they've been designated to be treated in the glue factory. We're waiting in the wings. Those four things that I think we need to do, and I think there's growing consensus that we need to do this, but we haven't had the leadership to get it done, or the will of enough members of Congress to get it done. And that's a lot what this election is about next Tuesday. Those four factors are: one, we cannot continue to spend at the rate we're spending. We must take a bloated, bureaucratic spending on a bunch of things that people would like to do but we can't afford to do. And we have to, over a period of time, get our budget balanced so we stop going into debt, so that government is doing the essential things, but not the like to do but can't afford to do, or we never should be doing this in the first place. The best, Luke and I are going to be blessed and are blessed with coming from a state that has done just that. And the Indiana model certainly shows how you can take government functions and make them more cost-effective, more efficient, more taxpayer-friendly, and still provide the essential services that government needs to provide. Mitch Daniels and his team and our legislature, we have a state legislator here today. I think, Doug, you're somewhere here in the audience. You get, there you are. Great credit for all that you've done, along with Governor Daniels, and to make Indiana the model for what the federal government needs to do. Thank you. It's a joy, Luke, to be able to go to Washington, and when people say, how do we do this? I said, let's take a look at how it was done. How a state could take a massive deficit and turn it into a huge surplus. How a state could privatize and more effectively put functions in place that were done at less cost and more efficiency. How a people could support that kind of effort, make the sacrifices that we made to put us as the leading state in the Midwest and maybe the country, as the place to go if you want to do business, if you want a business-friendly environment and laws, if you want a reasonable cost of living and reasonable tax rates. Indiana stands out like a shining star in the Midwest. My colleagues and your colleagues that you will join are envious of what we have done. They've come up to me and said, when we passed this right-to-work law, they came up and said, you guys aren't going to eat our lunch. Once this economy begins to recover, Indiana is going to be the place to go if you want to, if you're engaged in manufacturing, or you just want to be in a state where you are not hammered by ever-increasing taxes or ever-increasing regulations that don't make any sense. So number one, we've got to address this fiscal imbalance. Number two, part of this effort has to be comprehensive tax reform. It has been over 25 years since we had our last tax reform. Our tax code is horrendously complicated. It is full of special interests and exemptions that favor a few, but not the many. And reducing our tax rates, because we are able to eliminate a lot of these unnecessary deductions and credits that's been proposed by Governor Romney, will make us more competitive around the world. In doing so, we have to be conscious of the fact that raising taxes on our small businesses and all those who are not corporations, and many of you probably represent that in this room, is simply not the answer. Already you're paying 35% top rate, and that's going to go to nearly 40% top rate with the expiration of the current rates that will take place automatically here at the end of the year if we don't successfully address that. So a more simplified, a more fair, a more competitive, a growth-oriented, revised and reformed tax code is absolutely essential, in my opinion, and a lot of opinion, opinion of a lot of others in terms of how that's the second piece. The third piece is regulatory reform. The president, after 2010, essentially handed a blank check over to his agencies and said, I can't get this through Congress anymore by law, so you just do it by regulation. These are unelected bureaucrats that are responsible to the voters, and a lot of the regulations that have come down, some of them particularly hard on Indiana in terms of its energy costs for the future, have to be measured in terms of the consequences of these decisions, cost benefits, and is this really necessary? You got a pent-up wish list of liberal ideas in terms of how government ought to be more intrusive in your business and in our personal lives. And they're flowing out of the EPA and flowing out of the Department of Education and flowing out of a number of these agencies in a record rate. And it is severely hampering our ability to grow and our ability to address some of our financial issues. And finally, fourthly, what you're never supposed to talk about if you're a politician, the mandatory spending, the entitlements that are running away with our budget. They're on an unsustainable course, and our health care programs, Medicare and Medicaid, are going to collapse with 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. They're going to collapse very soon, as the trustees have indicated, if we don't address some structural reforms. And that is, again, the debate that is taking place in this election between President Obama and Governor Romney, as well as members running for the Senate and the House. These are issues that we have to take on in 2013, or I believe it's going to be too late, and the market's going to do it for us, as it's happening in Europe. They're simply going to say that Moody's has already said, if Congress can't come together in 2013 and put a reasonable package together to put us on the right path to a balanced budget and to deal with this fiscal crisis, they're going to downgrade our ratings. That means higher interest rates. And investors around the world are going to lose confidence in America as the place to invest their money and the dollar as a sound currency with which to put their, to use for commerce and to use for trade. So that's the challenge that Luke and I will be facing starting in January. We had this lame duck session, as you know. There's a whole number of things we have to do. I won't take time to go through that, because I'm reminded of the story about the speaker who was a politician who was talking to the group, and afterward a woman came up to shake his hand, and he said, "How did you like my speech?" And she said, "Well, I liked it." She said, "But I think you missed several excellent opportunities." And he said, "Opportunities for what?" And she said, "To quit." I'm quitting right now, but I think we're going to do some questions and answers, and I'm happy to do that. But thank you for your interest this morning, and thank you for what the Chamber does for Muncie. It has a terrific reputation. I look around the room and see friendly faces and people that have been engaged in dealing with a tough economy and its impact on this community in particular. And I know that this is the kind of community, and you are the kind of people that roll up their sleeves and say we can address this challenge, and that you're doing it. So I commend Jay, you, and all what the Chamber is working to accomplish. Thank you.
Raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you so everyone can hear your question. Does anyone have a question for the Senator this morning?
Senator, could you address the fiscal cliff we keep hearing about? And does that have to be resolved?
Yes.
In the lame duck session?
Yes, it does, one way or another. There'll either be a decision to move it, to basically extend the deadline for when everything takes place, which is tax increases and a whole range of sequester and a whole number of things. To extend that for a period, 3 to 6 to 9 months, on the basis of the fact that, well, we either have a new president or we have a different Congress, and it ought to be addressed by them rather than in this shortened period of time with Thanksgiving and Christmas coming, and lame ducks have never really produced something, and you're making decisions too quickly. The downside of that is it perpetuates and extends this uncertainty, this dark cloud of uncertainty that's hanging over every businessman and woman, hanging over investors and others who say, I can't see the future, so how can I make decisions about increasing plant and buying new equipment, hiring new workers. And as I speak all across the state, I think well over 20-some visits with chambers and forums everywhere from small, and meetings with small business, medium business, large business, hospitals, factories, whatever, almost to a person. They say the uncertainty about what my tax rates are going to be, what my health care responsibilities are going to be, what the regulations are going to be, and what the economy is going to look like has frozen me in place in terms of making decisions about hiring, buying equipment, expanding, et cetera. And so the downside of our not getting something done, which provides some assurance or some look at what is going to take place starting January 1st, and if that's pushed off till, say, March 30th or June 30th or August 2nd or whatever, it just leaves us in this limbo state. So I personally would prefer that we stand up and address the problem. I thought we should have done that in 2011, we didn't. I thought we should have done that in 2012, and we didn't, for all kinds of reasons. But the sooner we can do that, the sooner we can get our country back on the path to growth.
Senator, you talk about some of the issues, I'm sorry, Jeff Lang.
Jeff.
You talk about some of the issues that need to be addressed, and the climate that's in Washington specifically the last 4 years or so has not been one conducive to get things done. How do you get people at the table to be willing to sit down and talk about these hard issues that both parties have such unique views on?
Usually gridlock is broken, and if you look historically, major changes take place, and gridlock is broken, whether it's between management and union, whether it's between Congress and the President and the American people, one of two ways. One is extraordinary leadership, where you have a leader that steps up and says, we're going to get together, both sides, we're going to get in this room, we're going to lock the door, and we're going to be here until we get this thing done. We have not gotten that leadership out of this president. Whether it was Simpson-Bowles presented years ago to him as a bipartisan way to go forward, the Gang of Six, the Committee of 12, any of a number of efforts to bring this president into the process. Many of those, which you haven't read too much about, but many of those were bipartisan efforts on the part of senators that have gathered together outside of their leadership and said, guys, we've got to get this done. All of those have been rejected by the president. If you're a Democrat running for the Senate this year, and you go home and talk to your base and tell them, look, I've got some bad news for you. We can't sustain all these programs. We can't spend all this money on your program. I'd like to help you, but we're out of money. You go home and talk to them and say, we need to start making some efficiencies and some cuts in government and federal spending. And your president is back in Washington saying, no, we don't need to do that. We just need to stay on the course that we've been for 4 more years, and everything's going to work out just fine. I know it's been tough, but it was all the other guy's fault. And look at what we inherited. Well, look at what George Bush inherited. I mean, 9/11 was not exactly what he was planning on in the impact that he did. Look what presidents always inherit some issue, and this next president will inherit a real mess, whoever it is. And so, you know, instead of blaming, but taking responsibility and taking leadership to bring the leaders and bring the players into a forum and say, you know, we cannot keep going down this road, and taking responsibility for what's happened in the past is absolutely essential. The only other way it happens is through crisis. And all you have to do is pick up the Wall Street Journal and read about the crisis in Europe, and you see that they are being forced into making decisions and reforms in a way that's having, you know, a major impact on them, a lot of it negative, because they're trying to figure out how to do it under pressure. So one way or another, we either get that leadership or we get a crisis. And that's why I talked about, if it's not done in 2013, I think we're careening toward a crisis.
We have time for one more question, Tim.
Senator, my name is Tim Keene. I'm with Second Harvest Food Bank. Currently, 1 in 4 children in Delaware County and in Indiana are food insecure. And I was curious to know what you feel responsibilities lie with the elected officials to address this issue.
Well, part of our responsibility is to be responsible to that problem. I have for years been saying that this is not just the problem, that the solution to this problem is not simply turning to Washington and say, how much more can Washington do? That there needs to be engagement at the local, state level. There needs to be engagement with the private sector and charities and so forth, and I know this is happening and happens a lot in Indiana. But secondly, we have to recognize that without a growing economy, with the mandatory spending eating up nearly 2/3 of our budget, we're simply not going to have the money to fund programs like yours, paving highways, doing medical research, supporting educational initiatives. The discretionary part of our budget is shrinking dramatically as the mandatory part increases dramatically. And so whether your interest is roads, repairing bridges and paving roads, whether it's education, whether it's social support for people in need, we're increasingly finding ourselves constrained by our abilities to deal with that because of our lack of growth in a stagnant economy. And so Congress, I believe, needs to do what I've just tried to outline here. And I think also we need to turn our focus not just to Washington as a solution, but to our local governments, state governments, and local institutions, whether they be government or whether they be private sector institutions, to deal with some of these problems. But I've talked, as special interest groups come to see me, I basically said, some of these are sound ideas, but we're broke. We just simply don't have the money for it, and we don't have control over where that money is going. And that's why I included entitlement reform in the package of 4, because if people don't get behind politicians who have the courage to stand up and say, folks, we can scare you on Medicare every election year, and that'll defeat the guy who dares raise the question about any changes, and elect the guy who says, I won't let them touch a dime of the current program, or make any reforms in it, like extending the age of eligibility or means testing or whatever. If you don't support those people in that regard, then you're going to continue to look at a shrinking budget for your program, whatever your interest is in terms of government support. So it's time that politicians were straight out with people in telling them that, folks, if we don't address this, then you can forget about a lot of the rest. Well, thank you. I mean, I'm getting a signal that it is time to quit, both from my wife and from my aide there, Paul Langeman, in the back. They sort of get the... And I thank you for the opportunity to this. We're on our way to Elkhart to meet with the Elkhart Chamber, then to sit down with the RV industry to hear their concerns about their current state of affairs and a number of issues, and then doing some political work this evening for your new colleague, hopefully Jackie Walorski, up in the South Bend area. That's for the day. And then tomorrow we'll be at Ross-Ade Stadium watching Penn State and Purdue slug it out, and I'll be checking my scores on IU and Notre Dame and others. Thank you all very much.
Senator, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to come join us today. As you leave this morning, you've been watching all of our sponsors scroll through the screen. Please pat them on the back and say thank you. It really is their work and their working with their partnership with the Chamber to make events like this happen. So thank you again for attending. Senator, safe travels today and through your travels for the next few months. And to all of you, safe travels back to your places of work. Thank you all.